So, how do you know if a girl is really into you or if she's using you? Now, a lot of guys think that being used means she's using you for money. But as we're going to discuss, being used can be 5 different ways a woman will use a man. And in this video, we're going to go over what those ways are, how to tell if you are being used by a woman, and how to handle it. Hi, I'm Bobby Rio, and we can look at this video as a public service announcement because coaching guys now for 15 years, getting on a session, very often early on in the call, an alarm goes off in my mind that tells me that this guy is being used by the woman that he's interested in. Now, there's some extreme examples. I have a friend whose brother was basically drained of his bank account by a woman who pretended to like him, continually asked for money, and by the time he realized that nothing was ever gonna happen with this woman, she had literally drained his entire 401k. A friend of my dad's met a woman online and he never even met her in person, and by the time he realized that nothing was going to happen with this woman, he had given her thousands and thousands of dollars. So that's the extreme example. But most of the time when I'm working with a client, it is the more subtle forms of being used. So how can a woman use a man? Let's go through them. So the first one is financially. And like I said, this is the obvious one, but when you're in this situation, it's not always obvious to you, especially if you've spent a large part of your life lonely and now you meet a woman and she's giving you attention and sometimes even affection or intimacy, and all of the sudden you find yourself paying for things and, kind of indulging her in what she wants. Well, what is the difference between treating a woman well and her using you financially? There's a few key things to look at if you're being used financially. One of the most obvious ones is if a woman is willing, write this down if you're in this situation, if a woman is willing to accept financial assistance from you before you've gotten intimate, before you've slept with her, before you've, had any kind of physical intimacy with you, you are being used. Women are very prideful, and no woman who has a legitimate interest in you will ever ask you for help with her rent. She will never ask you to buy her things. It's not gonna happen because a woman wants, if she really likes you, if she's really interested in you, she wants to impress you, right? She wants to win you over, and she knows that if she starts asking you and pretending like she can't pay her rent and she needs help with this and she needs help with that, it's a turnoff to a high quality guy, and she knows this. If she's admitting to you right off the bat before you've even slept with her that, she's having trouble and she needs help, chances are the only reason she's even talking to you is because she sees you as a mark. She sees you as somebody she can take advantage of. This is very, very, very true. And sometimes it hurts to hear this, but you have to be willing to accept this. Now, there's other situations where maybe you're sleeping with a woman and you're buying her things and you're paying for things. Well, in that situation, it could be a sugar daddy sort of relationship. And if that's the case, if you're fine with that, then hey, you're fine with it, right? But you have to be aware if a woman is accepting gifts early on, if she's asking at any point, she starts asking for financial assistance, you are being used. So the next way that women will use a man, and this is probably the most common way a guy gets used, if you're in the friend zone, it's largely because of this. She's using you for validation. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, women like to get attention from guys. They like to feel wanted. They like to have their self-esteem boosted. And when a woman is out there and she's, maybe struggling, right? She's out on dating apps, and there's a lot of guys, I always talk about it, that there's sort of the have and the have-nots when it comes to like dating apps, right? There's some guys that are on Tinder that are cleaning up, right? These guys are like literally have multiple women they're juggling, and they're, having sex with new girls every weekend. And women run into these guys and they get very, very jaded because this guy is not giving them the attention that they crave. So what they do is they find another guy who is making them feel good about themselves. Meanwhile, they're chasing that other guy, but they're stringing you along because they like to be complimented. They like to feel wanted, right? So how do you know if that's the case? Well, very often, if a woman is keeping in touch with you, right? A lot of times what happens is she'll ping you out of the blue. You won't hear from her, and then she'll like touch base and, hey, how's it going? And it's kind of this hot and cold with you. And a lot of the times that a woman is doing this, it's because whenever things aren't going well with some other guy and she kind of needs a self-esteem boost, she'll touch base, right? And you'll think, oh man, it's finally gonna happen. We're finally gonna move this thing forward. And then she disappears again, right? Anytime that's happening, it's usually because you are being used for validation. Another way to know if you're being used for validation is when a woman doesn't actually want to meet up. And this is actually true of all of these, right? Meaning that when a woman is really interested in a guy, I say this all the time, if you want to know where you stand with a woman, ask yourself, how easy is it to get her to meet up with me? Because I can tell you from experience that a woman who's interested in you, she will like change plans to meet up with you. If she works, she'll come over no matter how tired she is after work to watch a movie with you. When a woman's not interested in you, any little obstacle will give her an excuse not to come, right? She's tired, she's not feeling well. I mean, when a woman likes you, even if she's sick, she'll tell you, I'm sick, but I want to see you. Is it okay if we still, like, they're not going to use being sick as an excuse. They're not going to use being tired as an excuse if they're really into you. If they're using you for any of these reasons, validation included, then they're gonna find excuses not to meet up with you. Another way you can kind of tell that you're being used, and another way that you're being used, is for security or a backup plan. So sometimes you're dating a woman and you're hanging out with her, and you're hanging out, once a week, and sometimes you're even sleeping with her, but part of your mind might be telling you, she's not fully invested, right? And the reason this happens is sometimes women will use you as a backup plan where they're not quite into you, right? They don't dislike you, they're not unattracted to you, but they don't have that chemistry feeling. You don't give them butterflies. They're not chasing you, right? And a lot of my videos, I talk about how to get a woman to chase you, because that's ultimately what we want. Not because it's like a way to control women, because that's like when a woman's chasing you, it's because she's totally into you the same way you're totally into her. Well, if it's one-sided, it's like, well, she'll meet up with you when she has nothing else to do, and she'll occasionally sleep with you, but the investment isn't there. That's the way to tell. One of the things I always say is she initiating? How excited and eager does she seem to want to meet up with you? And another way to tell is, does she remember details of your life? Because when a woman is really into you, right, when she does like you, everything you say, she's gonna remember it. So if you're telling her a story about your brother and something that happened, she's gonna remember that you have a brother, right? It's gonna go into her compartment of sizing you up because she's interested in the future with you. But if you've told her multiple stories about you and your brother, and then one day she's like, oh, you have a brother? Or you tell her where you grew up and she forgets that information, or you're telling her about a coworker and she forgot the story you told her, it's because she's not really invested in you. She's probably with you and she likes the security of having a guy she can hang out with. She likes knowing that there's a guy that does want her, but chances are she's still talking to other guys, looking for, Prince Charming, the guy who does sweep her off her feet and does entice her to chase him to come along. So one of the ways that I always, say that you can identify this is really pay attention to how much she's paying attention to what you're saying. If you find very often that you mention something, you tell her something, and then she just doesn't really seem to remember it, that's a good sign that you're being used for security. Another sign that you might be being used for security is she's very reluctant to make future plans with you. So when a woman's really into you, you're gonna notice that she starts suggesting things, right? Oh, we maybe it's the summertime and you guys are talking about snowboarding, and she's like, oh, we gotta go snowboarding this winter, it's gonna be so much fun. Or maybe she's got like a wedding coming up and she's like, oh yeah, my cousin's wedding's coming up. She'll invite you to something in the future. If she's very reluctant to move conversation into the future, it's probably because she's not thinking that far ahead and she's using you for security. Another way that you might be being used, and I see this a lot with some of my clients who are, a lot of my clients that hire me that are maybe living in New York City or Los Angeles, and they have a little bit of money, and these women are not using them for money. Let's be clear, right? But they are using these guys for connections, meaning these guys get invited to, cool parties. They know celebrities. They're in charitable organizations where sort of the upper echelon hang out. And a lot of times women like this, right? They like being invited to a place where they might spot Leonardo DiCaprio or something like that. And even though these guys aren't necessarily paying these women or giving them money, the women are using them for those connections, those favors, right? So if a woman hints at things, that's sort of another way to tell if you're being used. So again, and I always have to explain this to my clients who are in that realm of having a lot of money and having a lot of, connections, that, it's a balancing act, because if you have these connections and you do go to these cool places, of course you want to invite the girl along with you, right? You want to, because it's fun for you, it's fun for her, but you have to be aware of, is she only interested in hanging out when it is something like that? Is she just as excited? Because if a woman's really into you, she's just as excited to come over to your place and, binge watch Netflix as she is to go to one of these events. Sure, she'll enjoy going to a cool party, but if she never wants to just come over and relax on your couch, it means that it's probably more important to her that she's getting these favors, these connections from you, right? Favors could be, another example of favors is if, let's say it's a coworker and you have a sort of higher position than her, and you're helping her out a lot, and she's hanging out with you, but there's always that element of like, what are you doing for her? What is she getting out of this, right? So you want to pay attention to that, right? Again, is she willing to hang out with you outside of how you're helping her, right? If she's not getting anything out of it except for time with you, how enticing does that seem to her? If she's really into you, it should be very enticing to spend alone time with you, right? A lot of times, if a woman really likes you, she'd rather stay at home watching Netflix with you than go to a party, because really there's no reason to go to the party, right? She's got the guy she's interested in. And you'll find that out when a woman really likes you. A lot of times her desire to go out and socialize decreases quite a bit. So the last way we're gonna talk about that you might be being used, a lot of guys are gonna go, really? This isn't true. But yes, women will use men for sex. This happens a lot with a woman who has come out of a relationship. I've experienced this myself, where a lot of times this is like an ex-girlfriend or somebody like that who comes back into the picture. She starts sleeping with you again, but the commitment to the relationship isn't there. And why this happens is because a lot of women, are like us, right? They want to have sex, they like having sex, but a lot of times women don't want to go out and have sex with random guys. So they find a guy that they're comfortable with, a guy that they feel safe with, and they'll make this guy the guy that they sleep with until they find the guy they see a future with. And this happens a lot if you're getting like booty calls, another thing, if she doesn't want to introduce you to her friends, if she's keeping you away, even if it's an ex-girlfriend, this is one of the things you'll notice, right? And I noticed this because I had an ex-girlfriend years ago who did this to me, where she'd come back around, we'd start sleeping together, but she never wanted us to go public again, right? Like, we used to hang out with her friends, and once we were sleeping together again, there was no more of that. There was no more like, hey, come here, my friends are gonna be here. It was like I was her like little private sort of thing. And if that's happening, she's probably using you for sex. Now, one of the things that you want to, when we talk about all this, right, all these ways of being used, one of the things that you want to actually ask yourself is, am I okay, right, with this? Am I okay with this? Because sometimes you might be okay with it, right? So if a woman is using you for sex, which was the case years ago for me, at first I wasn't okay with it because in my mind, I thought we were getting back together. I thought that, something was going on. But eventually I realized, wait a minute, nothing's gonna happen with her again. We're not gonna ever be back to boyfriend, girlfriend, but now I'm okay with it. I'm okay with, sleeping with her occasionally. If you're okay with this, right? If you're okay with a female friend or somebody who's hanging out with you for validation, if you're a guy and you go to good parties and you have a lot of, connections and you just want an attractive woman on your arm, this is one of the things I ask guys all the time. Like, if you're okay with being used, hey, that's okay, right? Because a lot of times men are using women too, right? You want an attractive woman to bring to a social event, right? So she's using you, but you're using her, that's fine. But you have to ask yourself, am I being honest about this situation? Because if she's using you, but you really have feelings and you really see a future with her, the danger is you're wasting time. You're wasting your life, right? You're gonna keep getting older and you're gonna keep moving on, and if your ultimate goal is, hey, I wanna find a cool girlfriend, or I wanna get married, or I wanna have kids and raise a family, and I've seen this happen where a woman will string a guy along for years, and meanwhile, he'll have opportunities he's not taking advantage of with other girls because in the back of his head, he's like, one day she's gonna commit to me. Well, if a woman is using you now, I can almost guarantee that at no point in the future is she suddenly gonna go, now I really want this guy. Now, is there ways to turn around a girl who's only slightly interested? Yes, I talk about all that all the time. The Scrambler, all of that is about taking a woman who's lukewarm, changing it, right? Taking a woman who's a female friend and changing it. But there's a difference between somebody who's using you, right? Somebody who's using you versus somebody who's just not that attracted to you. And that's kind of where you're at, right? And you kind of have to be aware of this. Now, another thing what I always tell guys is you got to think of it like a scale, okay? And you got to say me, her. And you got to look at it like, well, what am I getting out of this? And what is she getting out of it? If she's getting money, connections, validation, right? And all you're getting is text from her, the occasional company, and she's getting, all these things validate. Okay. You have to ask, again, you got to just be honest with yourself and saying, she's getting way more out of this relationship than I am. Am I okay with this? Now, one of the ways you can test this, if you're unsure, again, you can try, if a woman is using you for money, it's very simple. Cut her off financially and see what happens, right? A lot of guys are scared to do that. But if she really likes you and you cut her off financially, if she reacts negatively to you cutting her off financially, she was never interested in you. When it comes to validation, one of the things what happens with validation is you get confused because a woman might be threatened when you meet another woman, right? You have a female friend and you start talking to somebody and the female friend seems jealous, but really what's happening is she's threatened that she's not gonna get your validation anymore. And you wanna pay attention of if I withhold, and getting out of the friend zone, again, if she's not using you, is not hard if you do it right, okay? If you follow a lot of the steps that I talk about in some of my other videos, getting out of the friend zone is not difficult. But if she's using you for validation and you cannot withhold that validation, you're never going to move forward with her, right? So one of the things you can test is, I'm not gonna validate her. And what happens? What happens if I'm hanging out with her and I'm actually treating her like a friend as opposed to, a girl that I'm just constantly validating? These are things you can do. You can ask for investment from her. Ask her to do you favors. See how she reacts. Again, I mentioned paying attention to if she's remembering things, but asking her for a favor, right? Like how eager, if a girl's really into you and you go, hey, I would love a home-cooked meal, like she'll want to cook for you. If she's into cooking, right? Some women just hate cooking, but if she's into cooking, she'll want to cook for you. But if she's like, oh no, like she's not really that into you. If you feel like you're being used for sex, ask her to meet up with her friends. And that's a good way to tell, because if she refuses to let you meet her friends, it's because you're compartmentalized as a guy that she's just using for sex. Finally is you have to be willing to walk away. Again, in any of these situations, you have to say to yourself, I'm not getting what I want and I'm going to walk away. And you have to do that because if you don't do that, again, you can waste a lot of time in your life, but also you become accustomed to being taken advantage of. And I see this with guys where it's like, I'll talk to them and I'll find out that this one girl is using them. And then we'll start talking about their last girl and this, and all of a sudden you see it's a pattern that they just become the guy that women use. Because if you're okay with that, women pick up on this, right? The kind of women that will use a guy will pick up on this, and you'll be sort of a target for them. So you really have to be honest about this. Go through it, say, am I being used for financial assistance, for validation, for security, for favors or connections? Am I being used for sex? The next thing you have to do is say, am I okay with this? Am I okay with this? Now, my personal recommendation, especially if you're being used financially, is don't be okay with it. But ultimately, it's your decision. Am I okay with this? But you have to be honest with yourself. If you're not okay with it, you have to walk away, all right? So this was my public service announcement. I hope that if you're in this situation, you don't just discount this and you don't just say, because a lot of times when we hear things that we don't want to hear, we push it out of our minds. But I hope you're open to listening to this and saying, he just described my situation. Am I okay with this? If I'm not, I am willing to walk away. Now, if you liked this video, if you found it helpful, hit like, subscribe to my channel, and leave me a comment. Let me know what you would like to see me cover in my next video.